Pod.
Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast. I'm Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on the show, doing a live stream as well. If you're unfamiliar with that, head to YouTube and find us on Oregon Ducks on 247 Sports. You can find us there as well. Hit the like and subscribe button on YouTube. Greatly appreciated. Spread the word. There's a lot to get to. We're going to take your questions, and you guys will dictate kind of the show. The back half, the front end, we're going to talk some additions to the team and some returns to the team because Jordan Birch dominated the headlines earlier this week. But Evan Williams, safety from Fresno State, an all-conference player, he has joined the program, and we need to talk about this. It's overdue. Jared made a good point before we were talking kind of about what we were planning on talking about in the show. Hey, Evan Williams, we haven't talked about him yet. This is a big get. All Mountain West Conference player at a position, guys, where, they have three seniors on the roster, and Evan's a senior too, but the production and the depth both lack. And so this is it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Evan Williams is your best safety and thus automatically is a starter as well.
I think there's no position on the team that's harder to kind of identify with the starting rotation or what that rotation will look like than safety right now.
Yeah.
For starters, that nickel position, that was where Bennett Williams, Evan's brother, played almost exclusively last season. He's gone, and there's not a natural replacement. I know Jamal Hill played there first 2 years of his starting career. He was at nickel, so there's maybe a natural replacement there, but Jamal played deep all of last season. He was one of their deep safeties the whole year. So I'm not sure if they want to switch that back up. You've got Evan, you've got Jamal now, you've got Steve, and you've got Brian Addison. Those are the first three guys are guys, or I should say the second and third and fourth guys are all guys who played a ton last year and are also seniors and could, in theory, go pro or finish up their collegiate careers if they want to. So there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. I do agree that I think there's a pretty decent likelihood Evan starts, probably a pretty darn good likelihood. I think that's more likely than not. And it could be that he's the best safety in the team. I'm not ready to quite go there yet because I just also don't know who's around him. But you certainly like the addition. You like the experience. And I think the addition speaks to the fact that there's no clarity. I think the fact that you are adding a potential starter here to me says, okay, between Jamal, Steve, and Brian Addison, one of those guys, maybe two of those guys aren't back. I just don't see you adding Evan Williams if you're going to also bring all these players back as well, because there was a ton of safety minutes that were, that to use, and almost every one of them went to those three players I mentioned.
Sorry, I was looking up Evan Williams and his PFF grades and what his snaps by position were. He played free safety, basically exclusively at Fresno State, right, and then lined up at that left or right outside linebacker position. He played in the box for just under 200 snaps, and then 250 of his snaps last season were played at free safety. So I would imagine he comes in and is a free safety for Oregon, although I think that they have good depth there. So they will probably try to use Evan and try to get him into that same position that Bennett was in that nickel safety. I mean, there are a couple players for Oregon's safety room that I really like. I really like Brian Addison. I do like Evan Williams and what he can provide. And I do like Triquez Bridges as a safety. I talked about this with Jared Denny of On3 last night after the men's basketball game, which went horribly, by the way. We're not going to discuss that today. We both think that Triquez Bridges is a better safety than he would be a cornerback, and we've come to really like Triquez Bridges on this podcast, and his stats indicate that he really performed pretty well under the final couple of games of the season. So I think Oregon will try to mix and match here. It would not surprise me at all if they keep trying to add people through the transfer portal to their secondary. It's just a position of weakness right now. And Evan Williams, the addition of his certainly shores that up more, just because he was a solid player at Fresno State, multiple-time all-conference team guy. And Oregon needs that in their secondary. Like Eric went through, there's like 4 guys who could leave if they so decided, or they could all come back and they could have a deep room. But it's kind of hard to rely on anybody coming back, seeing as how obviously the transfer portal is there. People could just want to start their professional careers either in football or outside of football. And then you have guys like Cam McCormick who seem like they would be eternally an Oregon Duck, who announced that they are entering the transfer portal. So it's a tough thing to bank on, but I do think that you'll probably see a couple of those safeties back. It just depends on who, and then it all comes down to positional versatility. I know Oregon trains those guys at free and deep and nickel safety all the time, but at that point, it just depends on who's best where, and there's no clear answer for a Bennett Williams departure other than maybe Evan, his brother, but judging by where he played last year for Fresno State and how good he was, I'm not sure if you really want to mess with that. But it's up to whoever is hired as the new safety coach.
That's the other part.
That's the other part of it. Whoever is hired there, and then I guess whatever Tosh and Dan Lanning agree upon of who's best where. So there's going to be holes to fill there 100%. And Evan Williams is a great addition, but there's still going to be some question marks irregardless is a silly word.
I like it.
Are we all in agreement that we kind of expect a transfer to come from this position group?
Yeah, I am.
Transfer out or in?
Out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably.
So. A transfer out or just somebody graduates and just says, I'm done playing football. I know it's like, it feels weird to say that, but like between Stevens, Addison, and Hill, those guys are all 5th or 6th year players in 23. Like, so at some point, we talked about this a little bit before with Cam McCormick about at some point you just kind of go like, do I want to keep doing
at some
this?
point it's over. Yeah, it's like I don't want to go to school anymore. Football is fine. We can start in your professional career.
Yeah. No, so I expect that'll be someone who leaves of that group.
I almost think there could be 2. Maybe one of the upperclassmen and one of the underclassmen guys. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. But I think that what
I was going to say, that's the other thing, is that Oregon's like underclassmen at safety is really tiny. They have Damon David, Trajan Williams, and then JJ Greenfield, who's a walk-on. So they haven't necessarily been adding depth there, to say the least.
They did sign a couple of prep guys, though.
They did, yes.
Into Canberra and Turner, who are safeties. No, but you're right. You're right.
I'm behind it. Yeah, we're not like expecting those guys to transfer out.
No, right.
And get to Canberra and Tyler Turner, but like there's just not a lot of depth there, especially if, let's say, I don't know, if all 4 of those guys decide to leave the program for one reason or another, like that suddenly you're really looking at playing Tyler Turner or Cody DeCambro like on a regular basis.
And I don't think they want to do that.
That's not the direction they want to go. Mm-mm. Safety is is probably the most mysterious position on the team. We don't know who the coach is, and there are a ton of guys who have a ton of starting experience and playing time. And now that you add in Evan Williams, it's really hard to kind of get a handle on how all this is going to play out, especially when you have hypothetically the possibility of a guy like Triquez fitting better at safety. And maybe that's something that happens. That's something we're pushing. That's nothing that's been said or communicated, but we're on the Triquez. Maybe he's better at safety than corner train. And there's just a lot to kind of parse through at safety right now. I think it's a position that there's more questions than answers for sure.
I do think Triquez is better at safety, but he was really impressive in that game against North Carolina at corner.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they added Kyrie Jackson, but that's also a position group where the numbers are thin. And if you pull him, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure he started over 10 games at corner this season. If you pull him, I mean, you're taking away your most experienced player at that position group, and the unit there, it's not loaded with talent either, like proven talent.
No, and you're correct. It's like I want to see Triquez play safety just because I think that's his best spot. But he is a good corner, and Matt, like you mentioned, behind him there's not a lot of anything. Christian Gonzalez is obviously gone, and then you have Dante Manning and Jaleel Florence, Jaleel Tucker, Darren Barkins, Avante Dickerson, like all these guys who, most of them were high profile recruits, but most of them haven't really seen the field for prolonged durations of time. And you kind of wonder, it's like, all right, so which one of these guys is going to be a lockdown corner? Because maybe Kyrie Jackson is, I would pencil him in to start now, barring another transfer or something like that, or, Manning or Florence, stepping up in the offseason. But that's still not Christian Gonzalez. I mean, Christian Gonzalez is going to be a top 15, top 20 pick in the NFL draft. And Tre'Quez Bridges, you at least have, there's consistency there. You have reliability. You have a guy who knows how to play the position and has done so for the last 2 seasons. And so maybe, maybe that's another position that they look to add in the transfer portal.
Sure.
I mean, I know, Georgia's Jaheim Singletary transferred just the other day, or entered the portal just the other day, former 5-star commit in class of 21, originally committed to Dan and company at Georgia. So maybe that's somebody that they go after. But it's tough because I'm sure we'll get to this later in our Q&A because of the scholarship numbers. It's already happening in our chat over here to my right, and wherever else you guys are looking on the screen. But yeah, it's good. It's just tough because they're going to need, they might need another guy or two at both both safety and corner.
Jared, from my perspective, it's to your left.
Yes.
And for you, it'd be to my, anyway, this is stupid semantic of where the chat window is for each of us, from each perspective. Can I ask a very unscripted question that I just kind of down? Okay, I won't. All right, Matt, what do you have? Matt, let's move. I was just sitting here thinking about, you mentioned, the cornerback position about, should they add, should they not add? And then the added element of, could there be a player like a Florence or a Manning who kind of pulls through? Do you think we start overlooking to a certain degree player development because of how easy it is to go add plug and play players? Like, I'm not saying the coaches do, but do you think, because I feel like maybe this is more of a personal admission than it is a question for you guys, but I find it really easy right now to go, they'll just go get a guy in the portal because of the ease of which that is, which of course for decades was not the case. You couldn't just go find a guy who was a starter at Iowa and move him over across the country to come here. I feel like sometimes we overlook the possibility of a player just getting way better in an offseason. Like, and I'm not even going to say who this player is because the offseason is just starting, and that would be ludicrous for me to suggest. I think Jaleel Florence is going to improve 10 Madden points, or however you want to, 10 NCAA football overall ranking points in this offseason, like however you want to kind of market. But I do think one of the things we don't spend enough time maybe kind of outlining when we think big picture at this time of the year is who can just get a lot better. And there are going to be players, and I think maybe part of that is because under Mario, it didn't always feel like that took place, not to take too many shots, but I think player development was always something that people sort of suggested wasn't maybe as good as it could have been. But I also think there are some really talented young guys on this team who had either small roles last year or no roles last year who, like, I wouldn't be surprised to take a big step. And frankly, they need that. And, when I posted my defensive 2 deep hypothetically on the message board yesterday, a lot of people are like, gosh, that looks terrible. A lot of guys who are unproven. And there are a lot of guys there that they're going to rely upon who are unproven. But those guys, or most of them, are really highly regarded recruits who could, in theory, take a huge step from where they were this past season to where they could be. I don't know. I've just been thinking about it. I just think we spent so much
Marcus Harper is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, there's a guy. Right. So, I don't know. Just tossing it out there. Just like, I think player development is the thing we almost kind of overlook these days just because of the ease of like, hey, we're just going to go grab a guy at this position of need and put him here. There could be some guys in this team who really take steps. And I think that has to be open.
I think the guy that I instantly gravitated towards was Keith Brown. He looked really good. And again, it's just one game, and you don't want to make too many expectations off one game. But he looked the part of a linebacker in that North Carolina game. And it felt weird that in a game in which Noah Sewell didn't play, Justin Flo had transferred, your 2 highest rated players you've ever signed at that position were not on the field in that game, and yet the linebackers were good.
No, the linebacker. I mean, I thought that was really encouraging.
Yeah,
so maybe Keith Brown's that guy you're talking about. I don't know.
I think, Eric, to answer your question, how it definitely gets overlooked because nowadays it's just a plug and play. You're like, I need a wide receiver. Check. I go into the transfer portal. Got him. I need an offensive lineman. Jack, I need a quarterback. Jack, you can go in and it's like going to the grocery store. You're not just pulling from a lottery machine. It's like, well, I might get a carton of eggs and some milk, and I can just go into the store and get some. But player development is still extremely important for all of these programs because we've talked about this before, or at least I have on this podcast, where you look at a team, we all talked about it. You look at a team like Colorado, who has the best transfer portal class in the country, and it's got all of these, really formerly good players at their previous institutions on it. It's 10 guys. It's 10 to 12 guys. That doesn't equal immediate success unless it's an outstanding quarterback. Like, for Oregon's transfer portal additions last year, like, they were good. They were solid. They were starters. They contributed to the team. But the most important one was obviously Bo Nix, because that's your quarterback. You win and lose by how well your quarterback performs during a game. But other than that, it's just like more or less just kind of depth pieces. Like, you want really talented guys who start. Like Christian Gonzalez was obviously really instrumental to Oregon's defense this past season, even though it wasn't a good defense. Like, it really helps when you have good players, because if you accumulate enough of them, you might have a good offense or a good defense. But all that really matters is what your quarterback can do, because you need the internal development of everybody else on the roster, the 60 plus other guys on the roster to formulate a team. It's a team sport, and it's no different in the NFL. It's no different in college football, no different in basically every sport on the globe, except maybe for golf.
Well, I think, Eric, to your question or your point, like, UCLA will be a good case study to that, because Chip Kelly does not really recruit high school guys, or a lot of them. He does, but he doesn't sign mass amounts of them anymore. And for the second year in a row, they're loading up on transfers. I mean, they got a guy while we were recording this podcast, Jamichael Strudevant from Cal, goes to UCLA.
It's a nice addition. Good player.
So that would be a case study to your point of what do the Bruins look like this season with a freshman quarterback in Dante Moore and then a bunch of transfers around him.
I don't know. We'll see. It's certainly. I think it's just. It's not even Oregon specific. I think it's just on a national landscape of like, how does all of these portal additions impact player development? Do players still get developed the way they need to, or do coaches go, we'll just go grab a guy from East Carolina or wherever and put them into the spot?
Returners, let's go here. Dorless and Casey Rogers announced, I think, almost like back to back, or was it the same day? Even
it was a day apart.
This week has had a lot of
2 days apart.
2 days apart.
Yeah, because Dorless was Sunday and Rogers was Tuesday.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
But nonetheless, Dorless is back, your best defensive lineman. Rogers is back, a guy that made a game-saving tackle, really solid. A guy that we all were kind of like, he's just going to be a guy. He's going to be a Jag when he showed up, and you couldn't afford to have him off the field for long stretches of time. He was very impressive in his first season. And now the defense kind of is rounding into form. The addition of Jordan Birch, Mateo joining the group, Blake Purchase, Jared's guy, pointing the group as another edge guy, Funa coming back, the North Carolina or the Holiday Bowl MVP on defense. I think it's fair to say with Dorless back and Casey Rogers back that this unit should be the strength of the defense in 2023. We kind of said that this past year. They were decent against the run. They were not very good against the pass, but I think this is another year in which up front they should be solid, really solid should be like their floor for this season.
Well, it's constructed in a way where you at least know you have experience. You've got a ton of experience, right? I mean, I was just pulling up the story I wrote earlier this week after the Rogers news, and it's 75% of the snaps played along the defensive line and at edge are back now with all of these returnees. Matt ran through them, 5 in total, 4 guys who played extensively this year, and then Popa, who didn't play this past year, but who everybody had kind of penciled in as a starter going into this 2022 season after starting every game a year ago. obviously excited that he was able to get another additional year through a waiver. But no, I think you look at this group and you go, there's a ton of continuity, a lot of experience. Birch obviously is a huge addition. We talked a lot about that on Wednesday, so I don't want to go over that too much. But there's enough experience where that part isn't the issue. And now it's a matter of, are they talented enough? Do they have the athletes? Because they really haven't changed too much of who is there. And I think I go back and I look at this season, and when we did our letter grade, I kind of recapped our letter grades last Friday, I think. I had the defensive line as the best group on defense, and I had it by a pretty decent margin. And I think that holds up the more you look at the way the year played out. The pass rush stuff wasn't great. There's no question about it. But against the run, they were effective. I think the guys you have back, you can kind of, in at least theory, have a skeleton idea, I guess a skeleton crew kind of idea of what this looks like next year. And you can feel decent about it. Like, it's not like I talked earlier about safety, where it's like there's a bunch of guys back, but I don't know how it all fits. I can pretty clearly see or have an idea of what this defensive line and this edge position kind of looks like next year. Of Birch, to me, feels like somebody that is just replacing DJ Johnson, and that's where he's going to play. Maybe he shows up and they want to have him put a hand down, and that moves Dorless to the defensive tackle position Casey Rogers played, and then you move Casey Rogers somewhere. But like, you could pretty easily just say it's the same starters as last year, except for DJ Johnson is gone and you're replacing him with Birch, and Jordan Riley is gone and you're replacing him with either Taki Taimani or Popo Amavai. The rest of the guys are the same, right? Because Casey Rogers was playing that defensive tackle position next to him, and Dorless was playing the other end position. So you could easily just say, because of all these returners, that it's just as simple as just kind of shoring up these spots, which I think is a positive. There should be some continuity there, which I think we know is a big deal. And then the addition of Birch is huge, because we saw with Dorless, think about how much better he was with Kayvon Thibodeau next to him. Think about all the attention Kayvon Thibodeau took that allowed Dorless to have one-on-one matchups. Well, this year that wasn't necessarily the case. I don't think DJ Johnson attracted the same amount of attention, and that kind of kept Dorless pretty bottled up for the most part. I mean, I don't think the stats are atrocious. It's not significantly worse than what he'd done in the past, but it certainly wasn't a breakthrough step forward season, which going into the year, remember, that was what we were talking about. Okay, where do these sacks come from? Kayvon's gone. It's going to be DJ and Dorless. And those guys, I think, ultimately led the team, but I think Dorless had 3 sacks all season, 2.5 or 3 sacks. So they need more out of him, and I think there's an opportunity for them to get more now that he'll have Jordan Birch next to him, kind of maybe taking some more of that attention.
Yeah, and there will be plenty of opportunity for Dorless. He plays a difficult position to get sacks or to get like really good counting stats as a defensive end, more than like someone coming off the edge. And for someone that Oregon kind of switches up their rotations with and puts his hand in the dirt, has him stand up every once in a while. But regardless, he's still a really productive player. And even with the lack of somebody on the edge to really take away an offensive lineman against him, he still finished the year, according to PFF, with 40 quarterback hurries, 4 hits, 2 sacks, according to PFF, which is really good at the end of the day. That's really good. And that's double the amount of quarterback hurries that DJ Johnson had. I mean, we went over this on Wednesday, Tuesday, one of those days, about how good I think Jordan Birch will be and how important it is that he's putting himself into this program just as a pure edge rusher. And Eric just went through it too. Just that changes the complexities of this defensive line. And I think it's a clear upgrade over DJ Johnson. I think Popo Amavai and Jordan Riley, kind of just like a cross out. I think they're the same kind of caliber of player. I think Popo's probably a better pass rusher. I think Taki Taimani might play in more early rundown situations than Popo Amavai. But again, you still have Casey Rogers, Brandon Dorless, Jordan Birch. Like, I really like that group of guys there. And so I agree with both of you guys that the defensive front should be the mainstay of the defense. That should be the best unit, at least on paper right now, that you can confidently say, like, yeah, if there's a position group on this defense that's going to do well, it's probably the front seven. It's probably the defensive line. And lastly, they've accumulated so much depth now on the edge, on the interior defensive line. And I'm not saying that they didn't have depth last year, because I thought they had a decent amount of depth with Keon Ware-Hudson and Taki Taimani coming off the bench. Riley and Rogers were two guys, like Matt said, that we just thought, all right, they're depth pieces. They won't really contribute. Well, they started every game. I count that as depth as well. But now you have all of these defensive linemen from across the country coming in the class of 2023. You have some edge guys in Purchase and Uyangalale, Jaden Moore. There's still probably some people who might transfer out just because that's a position that is restocked. And if, depending on where you are, we're on the depth charts beforehand, you might be even lower now. But it's full of both experience, like Eric brought up, and this newcomer group where, you hope that one guy pops. You hope that one guy becomes, I won't say like a KT type of player, but some guy becomes a contributor from the first day. And they have so many guys that it seems like even if they miss on a majority of them, there's still a really good chance that one or two of those guys pops and becomes an immediate contributor.
Quick calculation in my head. They have 17 defensive end, defensive tackle, nose tackle players for 2023. That's like
way too many.
That's like 5 too many, 4 too many. And so, like Jared's right. There's gonna be movement here. Like if you had to pick point one position group, it's got to be this one that we see transfers.
And I don't want to name names, but I think it's pretty easy, pretty elementary exercise to look at the names of guys on scholarship who just haven't played and say probably some pretty obvious names there that you can look at and go, that would make sense for this guy, that guy, and this other guy to go.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that it comes to that. I say that every podcast. But it's the reality of it. It's a hardline business. It's about winning football games, and right now there are guys on this team that help you win football games in a much greater manner than a lot of the guys who frankly haven't really proven they can play at this level. There are several guys that have been here 2 or 3 years who haven't played really at all, and just kind of go like, they're not going to play this year. Everyone's back, and they've added guys. There's almost no outcome where a couple of these guys are going to work their way into the starting lineup and be that kind of a player. There's just enough. There's several of those guys. Again, I don't want to name the names. You can look at the roster and figure it out. But if you're asking where are these portal departures coming from, kind of take a look at some of those guys at that spot, I think in particular.
Yeah, and we just another quick thing. We talked about player development earlier. 2 or 3 years in, and if there is no obvious development in your player, then there's usually not going to be one in year 3 or year 4 or year 5 after that. So like Eric said, it's not a very difficult exercise if somebody would like to go do that.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into your questions. We've already got a good amount on the live stream. Highly encourage you guys. Follow us on YouTube. Pretty simple to find us. Oregon Ducks on 24/7 Sports on YouTube. Drop in a question, like and subscribe as well. All right, welcome back to the Austin Audibles podcast. Let's start here with that was the wrong one. With Taylor Johnson. Do you guys think Cam leaving had to do with maybe his school and wanting to go somewhere that offers the next degree he wants to do? Eric, you did the interview, but so you can touch base with the school part. I just think this is Cam if wanting to get to the NFL, which everyone at this level probably wants to do. And looking at the roster, he's not going to be a starter in 2023 at Oregon. And if he wants to get to the NFL, he needs reps.
No, I think there's a lot of factors here, but to me, that's probably the biggest one. I just remember back in this past August at Oregon Team Media Day, everybody's kind of seated. You go through and you can walk up and interview a variety of different people. And I remember talking to him about that and like, what do you think about coming back for an 8th season? And his response was basically like, I don't really want to do that unless I need to prove that to make it to the next level, right? I think it's pretty clear he knows if he were to enter the NFL draft or start a professional career, however he ends up doing that, it's going to be difficult for him to stick somewhere. He hasn't really done enough to prove, and I think there are enough question marks and red flags, unfortunately. And I think probably there's some validity to these about his health, given his career. I don't think anybody drafting or signing him to a roster is going to say, hey, we feel great about this guy. He's played one out of the last 4 years or one of the last 5 years and made it through like that. Yeah, that just feels like a lot. So I do think that plays certainly a role. I do think to the academic part, like I think that's something you can't overlook either. Because I remember when we chatted with him most recently back in December, like in 2 separate interviews, asking him like, what would you even do academically? Like again, you've done your graduate degree, you've gotten like, I mean, what would you be working on? And he was kind of like, I would probably take maybe some yoga classes, maybe I'd work on some business classes to learn how to make some money. Like, but there wasn't a real clear answer for him, and I don't know, but maybe he did find a school, or maybe he will find a school, I should say, where there is something that offers a degree he's more interested in. But at the same time, I think he's looking for the football fit. I think that's pretty clear, which is why he's going across the country to Miami to take a visit, it sounds like, potentially. Because if it was just about academics, and maybe it is, if it was just about academics, he wouldn't be looking at a school like Miami, I don't think. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me for just a purely academic situation, if that's where you want to finish at your schoolwork.
Can we
all the way across the country.
Can we just say, like, academics matter for these guys, but it's like hardly ever the number one or even the number 2 thing they pick a school. Like,
I think,
it just depends on who the kid is.
Out of high school, maybe sometimes, but in this instances, I don't think so. Sorry, Jared, go ahead.
No, I have a couple of things to say about Cam, and I don't want this to come off as sounding mean or anything like that. First, any college kid in his position where he's going into his 8th year of school, any normal college kid would be in a doctorate program, and Cam is not in a doctorate program that we know of. And I guess theoretically could be going now to wherever he's going next to get into a doctorate program, but that's just going to add 4 more years. And if I were him, I would have used the eligibility that I can get my tuition paid for my doctorate program, but that's just me. Secondly, I'd like to address the whole he's leaving to go be a starter somewhere. Is he a starter anywhere?
Not at Miami.
Good question.
Where then? Where would he be a starter?
Probably you have to go down a level, most likely.
So,
right?
Yeah. And again, I don't want any of this to sound mean. I'm thinking about things like numbers wise. Like what, like in the NFL aspirations, I don't anticipate an NFL team drafting a 25-year-old tight end who's played 1.5 healthy years in his 8 years of a college. Who would a player like Anthony Brown was considered just significantly too old to be a quarterback who was drafted and had 1 good year and was healthy for 2 full seasons, 1 at Oregon, 1 at Boston College. So I don't know. I think Cam, if I were him, this is what I would do in this scenario where I'm granted these extra years of eligibility. I would get out of Oregon and I would go wherever I want in the country if they would have me. Like, I wanted to spend the last 2 years of my college existence before I get a real job in Miami. Sure, let's do it. Arizona, Texas, sure, wherever.
Cam's having his Remspringer year, basically. He's just going to go have a crazy year before settling into real life.
If I could get tuition paid for and play football and live in Miami and go to the University of Miami, where I already have a very nice relationship with the coaching staff, sure, and I get another graduate degree, doesn't sound too bad for me. But I just think I know that Cam is obviously going to go somewhere where he anticipates he will get playing time, but I don't know. I don't see that really happening no matter where he goes.
Yeah, enjoy a new experience in life while you can.
Yeah, have fun. Do it. Take advantage of the system. He's getting his 8th and 9th year of tuition paid for. Then go somewhere else. Have fun.
Miami sounds really nice.
It sounds great.
Sign me up to Miami.
Especially when you could probably get a big fat NIL deal from John Ruiz.
Yeah.
The more it sounds like
Come
it, guys,
on down, Cam.
I hate to say it, but I will be leaving this podcast to go to Miami to take a job at a Miami podcast.
Well, you do have a place to stay in Miami.
I do have a place to stay.
So
we don't have to talk about that. I do have a place locked in. I've heard it's pretty spacious.
Look at this one. Let's go to Fish bio. The pundits in their way too early top 10 Say the biggest question mark for the next season is the offensive line. What say you?
I think the other side of the football is a lot more question marks than I think there's a lot more question marks on the defense than there is on the offensive line.
This goes to we'll preview here. We had Brandon Marcello, Eric and I. We had a conversation with him that will come out next week. National writer for college football for 24/7 Sports. Eric asked him a way too early top 25, and what was the name change that you guys came up with?
He already calls it his stupid top 30 or something like that. I forget.
Yes.
The word stupid was in it. I don't recall the
yes. Stupid top 30. And it's because a lot of these, and I'm not including Marcelo because he actually knew and knows quite a bit about a lot of these teams ahead of time. But a lot of these top 25s, they just look at, hey, this group is losing these three guys. This group is, they're just looking at the stats, and it's hard to do it. I think there's a famous phrase when you're in like a national perspective of, you know a lot, but you don't know a lot in depth about all the topics. And I look at these outlets that say maybe there's questions along the offensive line. That's just them looking at it and saying, oh, wow, they lose 4 starters this season. That's going to be a change. Well, they also don't probably know that Stephen Jones has been like a off and on starter for the last 3 seasons and wasn't a starter this season because he got hurt. And the injuries that forced Marcus Harper onto the field, and the injuries that the last 2 seasons with Alex Forsythe that forced JPJ onto the football field. Like, that's where the in-depth stuff doesn't come through for some of these guys where, yes, they lose 4 starters, but I think all of us would agree, like, Oregon's offensive line is probably going to be pretty good next season. There'll be some bumps because there's new faces, but the experience and the talent isn't lacking.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is and I think we're subject to this too, but the additions to the portal that attract the most attention come from the positions we talk about the most. So we spend a lot of time talking about a Bo Nix at quarterback or a Bucky Irving at running back or whatever position, but we don't really talk about offensive line in the same way. They're just not. No. I know people really value offensive, there's a reason left tackles are one of the positions that are drafted at the top of an NFL draft because protecting your quarterback is super important. But I think when you talk in college terms, and a Johnny Cornelius addition, who again is like one of the top portal offensive linemen in the entire country, that addition kind of just gets overlooked a little bit because he's from Rhode Island. He plays a position that again isn't one of the sexy positions. Same kind of thing with Angelau, because you look at him and go, he didn't even really play this last year. People kind of forget about him. This guy's a 2-year starter at Texas, comes in, probably plug and play. So I don't share those concerns about Oregon's offensive line. I don't expect it to be the strength of this offense because you've got your veteran quarterback back who could be a Heisman Trophy candidate. You've got your running back and Bucky Irving back who everyone knows is super special. You've got a ton of talent at receiver. Tight end is, again, we talked about it on Wednesday's show, now that McCormick is gone, maybe your biggest question mark on offense just because you only have 3 guys, but the talent there is good. So I don't hold too many concerns. Back to Fishbio's question, I don't think that's the biggest concern for this team at all. I think it's very much still defensive related. And honestly, like my big concern more than anything is probably still what happens in the secondary. I mean, I think the defensive line has been shored up. We talked about that. Linebacker, of course, still a concern. We'll see what happens, but there, I think, are bigger questions on the back end, especially with the lack of a safeties coach, which you sort of need to be a pretty good defense.
Yeah, and to answer Fishbio's question just real quick, I mean, it's exactly what Matt said. These are guys who are just national writers who don't have the in-depth information on every team because it's basically impossible to have that kind of in-depth analysis for every team. It's really hard. It's like 160 plus teams in the country to have some idea about. And when you just scan it over and you see, wow, Oregon's losing 4 offensive line starters. Like, yeah, that objectively, that looks bad on paper. And that could be seen as a weakness. But it kind of reminds me of what the 2019 to 2020 team happened, where Oregon loses 4, well, I guess all 5 of their offensive starters with Penei Sewell, but 4 on paper after the season is over. But their offensive line the next season under Mario Cristobal was still good. And, I expect that Oregon's offensive line is going to be good this upcoming season. I really like Junior Aguilar. I think that he's just a plug and play guy, like Eric mentioned. Multiple year starter at Texas. He grades well. He's physical. He looks good in his position. And then Johnny Cornelius, I think, is a little more of a question mark, only because he's coming from Rhode Island. But you watch his film, you watch his game breakdown against Pittsburgh, who had one of the better pass rushes this past season. He was good. He moves really well. He's got great size. He's somebody who's either going to play right or left tackle. I think Eric and I are in agreement that he plays right tackle, and then Josh Connerly Jr. plays left tackle, which, again, is another guy where it's like, oh, darn, we lost 4 guys. Oh, darn, we only have a bunch of 4-star recruits and transfer portal guys who are multi-year starters at another Power 5 level school, except for Rhode Island, who are coming in. Like, shucks. They'll be fine.
Let's go to this one right here. Oh, wrong one again.
Come on, Matt. Pick the right one.
There we go. Larry Armitage, who's your favorite transfer so far that will make the biggest impact? I'm assuming in 2023.
Yeah, I think so.
No, 2026.
Oof, that's tough.
Damn, that's a long ways away.
I don't even know who's in the portal. This is a good question. I haven't.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm going to go to a position group that I don't think gets a lot of love. Johnny Cornelius. Like, maybe the best tackle transfer in the portal this year to date. And they're going to lose TJ Bass. They're going to lose Big Sala. Bass being the better of the two. Sala still being really good. Everybody wanted Cornelius, and Oregon got him. I think that's one that he doesn't play a position that he only gets talked about if he makes a mistake. And I think this will go down as one of the bigger gets for Oregon in this recruiting class. It's maybe not the most talented dude, but I think he's going to make a big impact at Oregon right away.
Yeah, this is probably recency bias, but I still think it's Birch.
I just didn't want to pick Birch because everyone's going to pick it.
I know, Matt. Good way to be the contrarian. No, but I think Cornelius is a good second pick because I was just kind of thinking through there, like, okay, offensively, there's not really anyone who's going to touch the ball and be the biggest contributor with the ball in their hands on offense that has been added. I think Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden will probably be second, third or fourth, leading the team in receiving. I think both those guys could start or play big roles, so I'm not discounting that. I think Jordan Birch is potentially your best defensive player. I think that's the kind of ceiling you have there. And certainly, if this isn't the case, you're in trouble, but should be your best pass rusher. And again, if he's not your best pass rusher and he doesn't provide much pass rush, I don't know. That's a bad starting point. That's concerning. So I think Birch, and I think it's pretty clear cut. I don't think there's really anyone else. Defensively, you could maybe make an argument for Justin Jacobs if he ends up being a starter and plays at a really high level. But I go Birch. There was very little hesitation for that pick.
The answer is clearly Birch. As I announced how much I really like his play style on the last podcast. However, I will be making the case of Justin Jacobs today. I think this is a linebacker that should fit into Dan Lanning's system quite well. He's a big dude. He's 6'4", 238 pounds. He's another guy whose body composition and his style of play and his type of physique that he has is not really on Oregon's roster. But you watch the defenses in the national championship game, specifically Georgia's, obviously. That's a team that uses those big linebackers and gets them downhill into rushing the passer. And I think that was I thought that was missing a lot this past season with Oregon's linebackers. Was their inability to rush the passer, which gives a lot more attention to Brandon Dorlus and company because the offensive line doesn't have to care about these two linebackers coming down in the pass rush. So I really like Justin Jacobs. I've watched a lot of his film. This is a guy who was hurt really early in his third playing season at Iowa. But he was projected at the start of the seasons to be like a day 2 NFL draft guy. A lot of upside here. I don't think we know what his status update is on his injury from Iowa, but it's been plenty of months where he should be back to his normal levels of play. And he's going to get a lot of reps. because right now he's one of the most experienced and most talented linebackers on the roster, probably the number one in both of those categories. I just think that it's going to be a different style of linebacker than Oregon is used to, even with Troy Dye in the past. But I do really like him as a player. I think he'll be an impact guy immediately, mostly because he has to.
Matt, I have a question if you don't have
Go
one.
for it.
Because I just think it's worth kind of bringing this up, the possibility of this from Miguel Cruz. Crazy as it seems, but do you see Oregon adding more transfers?
Yes.
The reason it's crazy is that Oregon's at 95 scholarships right now. They're at 95. Like, could they get to 100 at some point here? I have no idea. Like, obviously you can't be there when the season starts, but this is the part, and my answer is also yes, as Jared said, and I think Matt will say as well, is I do think they'll continue to add, and they'll add to the portal. They're still obviously in on Nicholas Harbor, we mentioned. They're in on Roger Pleasant. There are a couple of players that are being mentioned in the chat here. I don't know if we want to go into all of those, Matt, but there are several other notable portal players that Oregon's already been attached to. Gary Bryant Jr. is the name I'm seeing from USC, a receiver that Greg Biggins just 48 hours ago is saying they're kind of in conversations to set up a visit. I think Oregon is not done adding, which is a weird thing to say because I know so much concern is out there right now of like, oh my gosh, how do they get to 85? That's the big point. And the unfortunate answer to that question is it's by players leaving, either going pro, medically retiring, or hitting the portal themselves. So I don't know if I don't even know if anyone else here needs to answer this question because I think it's a consensus yes. I just wanted to answer it to kind of put that out there that people understand, so they're not surprised when next week there's a couple other guys who join the program, or in February when they sign a couple of prep players. Like, I don't think Oregon is done adding to this roster, which again is so strange considering where they're at from a numbers perspective, but it will all work its way out.
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes too. And to maybe transition to just another name out here, could Oregon maybe get Jaheim Singletary from Georgia? This is I believe a former 5-star cornerback.
I have another name to add from the Georgia list.
There's a bunch that hit the portal today while we've been recording this podcast.
MJ Sherman just hit the list.
Yes.
He's an outside linebacker. It was Dan. Dan was his primary recruiter. Another guy from that class of 2020 was Singletary.
I think both those guys are players Oregon should, will, could go after, would make sense to go after. They fill needs, they provide depth, and there's that past history there.
Yeah, I just a thought, and not even specifically to Singletary or any of these Georgia players, but Dan didn't hit Georgia really at all in the portal, right? The one kind of addition they took away was Jordan James had been committed to Georgia, and then kind of last minute, Carlos Lachlan and he had a relationship, ends up flipping to Oregon, signs here. We all know the rest of that. But there are players in the portal from Georgia that are really good players, players that Dan coached previously. And I just sort of wonder if we'll see now that there's a little separation, because I think it gets kind of weird when you're like, it's the same type of thing with Kenny Dillingham. I know they added Bram Walden, but like, it gets weird when you're a former assistant coach leaving a program, and how much do you actively actually want to take players from that previous spot, because you're burning bridges. But a year or two removed, Georgia becomes kind of just like any other school. I know they obviously aren't. They're the best program in the country, winning 2 straight national championships. They've lost 1 game out of their last like 40 something. I mean, they're crazy.
Decent.
But my point is, like, now that we have a little time kind of to separate the newness of Dan leaving, and he is now all completely out on his own, right? I mean, not that he wasn't last year, but there's probably a sense of like kind of weird if you go out from a school and you're chatting with the players you coach to come on over to Eugene. There's a little bit of time now. I wouldn't be surprised, not saying it's going to happen. It hasn't happened yet, but I wouldn't be surprised to see over the next couple of years some of these Georgia guys that he recruited who maybe don't pan out with the Bulldogs give Oregon a really serious look. It would make a lot of sense. And if you're Oregon, you're going, it's a really nice potential pipeline to develop, just 100%. Like it's because now you can tap into some of the best talent in the country who doesn't make it. I know no one wants to hear like, oh, we're taking the retreats, but at the same time, the guys that don't cut it out at Georgia are probably better than a lot of the guys that cut it out and other schools across the country,
Yeah.
and particularly the Pac-12.
Right, and that's the point that I was going to make. We're talking about guys who aren't starting at Georgia, and it's like, oh, they're not starting. It's like, yeah, well, they're behind like first round picks across the board. Like MJ Sherman was behind Nolan Smith, Azeez Ojulari. Like these guys are first or second round picks. Like you're not.
Georgia had first rounders go that didn't even start last year.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, Jalen Carter, who's going to be a top 5 pick, didn't start for Georgia last year, and they still had the number 1 overall pick. Like, it's just going to be. Hopefully, it becomes some type of a pipeline for Oregon because those guys, you just give them a shot, just see what they have out here, and I think that's the least. That's the absolute least you could do is just see what they have out here. I was going to make a reference, like it does seem interesting that the only guy Dan got was Jordan James, or what Kenny got was Bram Walden. It feels like there's almost like an unwritten agreement. Like in baseball, there can be written agreements. Like I know the Red Sox general manager Chaim Bloom was a former Tampa Bay Rays guy. They signed an agreement where he couldn't poach any of the Tampa Bay Rays like front office staff for a full 2 years, and then after that, it was open season. So. The other thing is like kind of more of a downer, I would say. If you are at Georgia, why leave?
Yeah.
You're just gonna, even if you ride the bench, you're still gonna play for the Georgia Bulldogs and probably win a national.
I think ultimately, most guys they want to play. I mean, it's just like Cam.
Certainly,
like,
yeah.
My counter to that actually would be if you're at Georgia and you've already won 1 or maybe 2, at that point it's kind of like I've already won the championships. Let's go get a role somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, but I don't know. That's just how I'm selfish about it. It's like I could, kind of have fun while maybe not playing as much, maybe not being hurt, and then winning championship. That sounds pretty good.
That's the old Chase Daniel playbook.
Never
playing and Chase
backup
Daniel,
quarterbacks, man.
Chase Daniel's going to retire with like $100 million in the bank account after having made like 2 career starts. It's the most incredible career possible. Matt, I don't know, Matt. Like we've seen this question in a couple different variants. This question about players. We'll just ask it. Yeah, that one exactly.
Yeah. I had my cursor over it. I was waiting for you.
As did I. What are your thoughts on this? Go ahead and read the question.
What if the transfers pay their own college tuition and walk on the team, then get reimbursement from the NIL plus its salary? 85 scholarship limits won't mean much then. My philosophy is this. If I can get my NIL money and my stipend from my scholarship, I'm doing both, and I want both. Yeah. If I can double dip, I'm going to double dip. I think it takes a very unique person to do what is being suggested. I don't see many players, many people across the country, across the sport doing this. Passing on scholarship money and just banking on NIL. I mean, it would have to take like exuberant amounts of NIL money to get these guys and not take scholarship money, even if the scholarship money is so low.
Yeah, I'm in the same place, and a couple thoughts. First off, like as you said, you take the most selfless transfer ever to take all of this into consideration. Like, I mean, it's not quite a parallel, but you just think in professional sports of like, why does a quarterback get paid all of this money if in theory he could say, I'm going to take less so you can disperse the money around the roster and make us better? That happens like one time a decade, right? Like it doesn't happen. People don't just say, yeah, I'm going to take less for the team very often. And I'm not saying that's a good thing necessarily, right? There's a level of like, wow, that would be really cool if you did. But most people just aren't wired that way. And especially when you're at potentially you're earning
your peak
your peak close to it. If you're going to play in the NFL, obviously not. But like if you're a college athlete who isn't sure about playing in the NFL, like why are you going to pass up some financial stability and the scholarship and everything? And the other part is it's not just the scholarship experience that you get. Like, the walk-ons don't get all of the little bells and whistles that the scholarship players get either, right? So there are certain things, and I don't know the day-to-day anymore. I don't know how it's changed because college football is changing so often. But there was a time where there were limitations made on who was getting meals every day. I don't think that's the case anymore because we certainly see walk-ons leaving the HTC with food, but
they do now.
They do now. But there was a time where that was the case. But there are differences between the scholarship and the walk-on athletes, even in what they're able to do and kind of what they're given. So I think this is a pie in the sky idea. And shoot, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see a school try to pull something like this off and go, hey, we've only got 85 scholarship guys, but it's like, but don't you really have 105 scholarship guys? Like, I could see a school doing that. Maybe it'll be Oregon. I'm skeptical of the entire premise, sadly. Although it would be very convenient for this Oregon team, which is currently at 95 scholarship players.
Yeah,
if they could find 10 guys to say, hey, we won't, screw it. We're just going to not be on scholarship and you guys are going to pay a bunch of NIL money. I just don't think it's very likely, personally.
It just wouldn't happen. And like to Matt's point, I want my cake and I want to eat it too. It's as simple as that. Why would I sacrifice? And if you're an NIL person, if you're somebody who contributes to players, let's say you're going to offer a player $40,000 to come to Eugene on a scholarship. Well, now you got to bump that to 80 because now you have to pay for them to have that same amount of money and then have that money to pay off all of the tuition that this person will be paying for. It's just silly. You're just spending more money regardless. And the question asker, whose name was Ducky, also puts, if a transfer is making $1 million a season, they'll have enough for tuition plus to live on, is what he's saying, which is true. If you're making $1 million a year, I would certainly hope that you would have enough money to A, pay tuition, and B, live off of it. However, what are the odds that you're not giving a scholarship to a high school football player that you're paying $1 million to come to your program? Like that person's getting a scholarship 100%. So, I mean, like Eric said, I could see a college program doing this, but why? Just, I guess to have to bend the rules and just have more scholarship level players. I guess, sure. Yeah. Why not? But then you run into an even bigger problem because now you have 105 scholarship players. All those guys are going to transfer out to go get actual scholarships or to go actually get playing time.
Well, yeah. And that was going to be my point, which is, I think, a really fair one and needs to be said of having 10 extra scholarship guys is great. Like in terms of, hey, you've got more talent around. But
on paper,
you're still only able to play 11 on the field at once, and there's going to be a lot of guys who aren't on the field. Like, think about this practice, this offseason of the 17 now guys I think who've transferred out. I want to say only the 2 tight ends and Dante Thornton were playing sizable roles at the end of the season. So 14 of the guys, 15 of the guys, 14 of the guys, whatever it is, transferred out in part because they just weren't playing here. So you're going to bring in another 10 players where those guys probably there's going to be the same kind of situation where there's a lot of guys who aren't playing and they leave. So I don't see a huge benefit of that in the long term. You could convince me of like maybe in the short term, one season, hey, maybe it's great that you're able to get this guy to come over and now it helps. But you think about it, your back end 10 guys on scholarship anyway aren't going to be contributors. Shoot, your back 25 guys aren't going to be contributors. Having 95 to me doesn't seem like a huge benefit to the team, and certainly doesn't feel like it benefits the individual. And then my last point before we move on to another question, Matt, and again, these NIL packages aren't made public, but I don't think a lot of guys are being paid $1 million a season, period. And the guys that are such highly regarded players that I just like to convince. Hypothetically, if it's Bo Nix or somebody of that caliber at a position like that, or a Jordan Birch, the guys that maybe you would theoretically be making that kind of money, to convince one of those guys you're not going to be on scholarship, I just think that's far-fetched to me.
And the guys that are getting paid close to 7 figures, not even 7 figures, but near it, I would be blown away that it's all coming from 1 or 2 sources of deals. It's probably upwards of 10 or more kind of agreements with whether it's like Bo Nix, for instance, had a deal with Bose headphones at the end of the college football season. Like it would be something like that where you get Bose headphones. Maybe you do something with Chick-fil-A, which he did. And then there's a couple of other instances where, some huge chunks of money come in. And that's how they get to that large number. It's not just one deal that's bringing in $850,000.
Thanks, Matt, for communicating that part, because I think we get stuck sometimes in the NIL stuff, and it's the thought is, oh, the school's paying in this much money. The school is not funneling $1 million to a player. It is a bunch of different marketing brands that are using these players for. Like, there has to be something. This is not just one person giving them all the money. I think Matt did a good job of explaining that, which I hope kind of lays.
Yeah, it's not just one check.
Yeah,
like here, Bo. Here's X amount of dollars.
I just want to throw this one up there. Eric Johnson asks, "Are there any rules around NIL?" No.
Not really. No.
There aren't very many.
No. It's basically the wild, wild west. And like, I'm going to end the podcast with this question. We're going to pose our own question to end it here.
Ooh.
A guy entered the portal yesterday. Omar Spates, first team linebacker in the Pac-12 at Oregon State this past season, has like 300 career tackles. Should Oregon go after him?
It's a position,
1 year of eligibility.
Yeah. It's a position where, again, I have been so critical of linebacker play, and I think rightfully so. I don't see why not. Like, he kind of fits what we're talking about, where it's a plug and play person, right?
Yeah. And he's out of the program in a year.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about the scholarship building up. Oregon's linebacker situation isn't great. We were going to open this podcast as like strengths and weaknesses of the roster going into the season. We're going to push that back and probably do that next week. I think linebacker is probably one of the positions that's right near the top, along with probably corner and safety, in terms of just there aren't enough. I don't want to say there aren't enough proven players, but you're certainly not confident with what you've got. So, yeah, I think Spikes is a player to look at. I think Oregon in general, some sort of inside linebacker with experience. I think a 1 year player is probably preferable if you can find one. The question then becomes, and maybe this is a good question, is could in theory, if you bring in two portal players to both start at inside linebacker, and that would be Jacobs and Spikes in this hypothetical, could that push Jeffrey Bossa to go back to nickel or somewhere else in the defensive backfield? I don't know if he can. I'm not sure he's. It's funny because he's known to be an explosive athlete. I haven't seen enough, certainly, for him to be explosive enough to play safety. But that hybrid spot, that could be a nice fit for him. I've always kind of thought that was the role he was playing back in 2021 before a rash of injuries hit that linebacking core and he was forced to move spots. So, like, that could be maybe we talked earlier on the show, like, there's no clear-cut nickel necessarily. Maybe that's how this plays out. Oregon goes and finds two quality inside linebackers. Maybe there's a guy in the roster. Maybe it's Keith Brown, and that pushes Bossa to nickel. But no, I think Spites makes quite a bit of sense. I don't know how that would sit in Corvallis. Probably not very well, but it's cut business these days, and I've seen crazier things happen with the portal.
Yeah, and I think Spates would be a welcomed addition. It's a linebacker and somebody who has multiple years of starting experience. Like Matt said, he's somebody who's just racked up the career tackles and provides an opportunity for Oregon to. I mean, this all depends if Spates is willing to go to Oregon. He's originally from Philadelphia, so that's a hard one. He did go to Crescent Valley High School, so again, he's a West Coast guy. He's an East Coast transplant, but. Would he go to Oregon? Maybe. I'm sure he would if the money is right, if Oregon wants to do that. He finished this year with 83 tackles and 8 tackles for loss, which would lead Oregon in both departments. Or no, 8 tackles for loss. I think Oregon had somebody higher than 8 tackles for loss. But 83 tackles absolutely would lead Oregon as a team. And that would be a welcomed addition alongside Justin Jacobs, who I made the case for earlier about how good of a linebacker he could be. Spates is a smaller guy. He'd probably be better in coverage compared to Jacobs. I mean, there's still 13, so there's still 5 more days until the transfer portal window closes. There's still guys who could pop up during the spring portal as well. I think Oregon's probably, if I were Oregon, I would see where my linebacking group is at during spring practice and then kind of make an assessment there. and then hope that somebody jumps into the portal. But I mean, going after Spates would be a good idea too if you're the Ducks. I think it's a very convincing position, and I do like what you guys were saying about Jeffrey Bassa. Maybe if you get another linebacker, you tell Bassa to cut weight, go back to that nickel safety position, which I think would be just a perfectly natural fit for him to play in with his coverage and his tackling ability. So maybe it works out. Sure, why not? Oregon, you have my permission to go after Omar Spates. Congrats.
Oh, wow. Significant for them.
We'll let Dan know.
Yeah, no, let him know. I allow him.
Jared signed off. He's got the max sign off.
Yep.
All right.
That's all you need.
That's going to do it for us here on the Odds and Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for asking the questions during our live stream. Again, we'll continue to do these on Fridays. Looking forward to the next one. Next week, we've got the mailbag. We've also got a conversation with Brandon Marcillo that will come out later in the week, and then the live stream. Plus, who knows? There may be more news that transpires that requires.
At some point, they have to hire a safeties coach, Matt.
They sure do.
At some point. Or maybe Oregon's going to go the unorthodox route and not have one.
That would be very unorthodox. We're just going to have less coaches for no reason.
For no reason. All right. Until the next one, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.